Hi, my name is Judith Carter. I am 28 years old. After many years living and working in New York, I returned to Boston for the family winter party. The old familiar house was lit up, the long dining table covered with a white cloth and laid out with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and glasses of sparkling wine. Relatives gathered in full, the atmosphere lively but heavy for me. From childhood to adulthood, my parents never stopped comparing me to my sister, Sophia Carter, who is 30 and who they always call their pride. In my parents' eyes, Sophia is the shining gem, and I am just a faded shadow. Just as I lifted my glass to my lips, my mother suddenly leaned in, her voice sharp. "Stop embarrassing us, Judith. Learn from your sister." I took a deep breath, set my glass down, and calmly replied, "Then let her cover the rent." My words fell on the dinner table like a shard of ice. No one laughed anymore. Sophia turned to look at me, her lips trembling. "What rent, Dad? This house was paid for by Mom and Dad already, right?" And in that moment, the room sank into a cold silence, as if something was about to be revealed. Have you ever been compared by your parents to your siblings and felt that your self-worth was denied? Share your thoughts and tell me where you are watching from before we dive deeper into the story. From the moment Sophia's doubtful voice rang out at that dinner, childhood memories replayed in my mind like an old film. I still remember clearly what it felt like to grow up in a home where love was never distributed equally. I was always the second child, not by birth order but by the way my parents assigned my place in their hearts. Sophia, my sister who is 2 years older, had always been regarded as the family's jewel. I do not deny that she is smart, articulate, and always knows how to please the adults, but the disparity in treatment turned my childhood into an unending string of hurtful days. When Sophia turned 16, my parents threw a grand birthday party in the backyard, decorated with pink balloons and strings of twinkling lights. I still remember the moment they handed her the keys to her very first car, a brand new Honda Civic, gleaming under the sunlight. She hugged them tightly, tears of joy shining in her eyes, while her friends cheered all around her. I was 14 at the time, standing in the corner with a paper plate of birthday cake, watching the scene with a heavy heart. 2 years later, when I turned 16, there was no lavish party waiting for me. I received only a simple greeting card placed on the kitchen table, and when I shyly asked about learning to drive, my father merely shrugged. "The bus works just fine, Judith. Saves money on gas and insurance." From then on, I grew accustomed to waiting for buses in the rain, while Sophia cruised around the city with her friends in the comfort of her car. The differences did not stop at gifts. Thanksgiving became the clearest proof. Every year, relatives gathered in full, seated around the large dining table. Sophia only had to walk in with her radiant smile to be showered with praise. "She's so graceful. Sophia truly is the role model of the Carter family." And me? I was the one who had to wake up early with my mother to prepare the turkey, peel the potatoes, set the table, and after the guests left, it was me who stood at the sink scrubbing piles of dirty dishes stacked high. I worked tirelessly, but hardly anyone noticed. I remember once sitting quietly in the living room, my hands still red from washing dishes, while my mother proudly told relatives about Sophia's academic achievements. In that moment, the feeling of being forgotten seeped into my heart, making me wonder if I truly belonged in this family at all. I am not lazy or useless. On the contrary, I love literature and I study diligently. Ever since high school, I had dreamed of getting into Columbia University, of living in bustling New York City, and pursuing a career shaped by words. I applied, wrote my essays, and when I received my acceptance letter, I cried tears of joy. But that happiness did not last long. My father took the letter, looked at me, and sighed. "Columbia is too expensive, Judith. Don't entertain unrealistic dreams. You should choose a cheaper public school to save money. Sophia will be doing an MBA at Stanford. We need to focus on her." In that moment, I was stunned. I had done everything to reach that dream, yet because of Sophia, my parents were willing to take it away from me. I ended up enrolling in a small in-state college with much lower tuition, which meant abandoning the opportunity I had longed for. Meanwhile, Sophia was sent to California. My parents did not hesitate to pay Stanford's enormous tuition and even bought her a small apartment near campus for convenience. I remember long nights in the shabby dorm, listening to the wind whistle through the window, trying to reread the poems I loved and telling myself that one day I would escape the shadow they had cast over me. Favoritism did not just show itself in the big decisions, it seeped into the smallest details. When Sophia came home to visit, my parents always threw a celebration, inviting friends and relatives to boast about her. When I returned, it was usually just a simple dinner with a reminder. Remember to save face for the family. Don't say things that might make people laugh at us. I became used to the comparing glances, used to being told to stay quiet whenever Sophia spoke, and even used to swallowing back my tears so no one would see my weakness. But that did not mean I accepted my fate. Those injustices lit a quiet fire inside me. I began to realize that if I did not stand up for myself, no one in the family would ever give me a chance. Those childhood memories, full of cuts and bruises, shaped who I am today, resilient, independent, and ready to counter their contempt with silent success. I still remember one winter night at 18, riding the bus home after a late shift at the bookstore. Outside, snow fell thick, and my hands trembled inside thin gloves. Across the city, Sophia was likely partying with her friends, driving the car I was never allowed to touch. I leaned my forehead against the frozen window and silently promised myself, one day I will build my own path. I will not need my parents' favoritism, nor will I measure myself against my sister. And that promise took root deep within me, following me through the years that came after. After graduation, I decided to leave Boston for New York. That decision was not just about choosing a place to work, it was my way of telling myself that I had to escape my family's shadow. I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm in Manhattan. On my first day, stepping out of the subway and looking up at the skyscrapers glittering with lights, I felt both overwhelmed and, for the first time in my life, a touch of freedom. I knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles, but at least it was a road I had chosen for myself, not one my parents had drawn for me in comparison to my sister. Life in New York was harsher than I had imagined. I rented a small apartment in Queens, barely over 200 square feet, with peeling walls and an old window that creaked every time the wind blew. Each morning, I crammed into a packed subway train, clutching a cheap cup of coffee bought hastily from a convenience store. By day, I worked in the office from 9 to 6, but rarely left on time. Advertising campaigns, presentations, endless meetings, all of it kept me at my desk long after dark. I often stayed until late at night, adjusting slides under the dim yellow glow of my lamp. On some nights, I returned home close to midnight, my stomach aching with hunger, and could only manage to cook a packet of instant noodles, eating as I stared at the stack of unpaid bills piled up on the table. But slowly, I began to prove myself. A campaign I proposed unexpectedly brought in a major client for the company, drawing the attention of my superiors. I will never forget the feeling of being praised in a meeting for the first time, not as Judith, the daughter of the Carter family, but as Judith, the one who saved this contract. The words were simple, but to me, they were a piece of the self-respect that my family had eroded for so many years. During that time, I met Veronica. She was a colleague in my department, the same age as me, of Puerto Rican descent, straightforward and funny. At first, I was reserved, but Veronica was the one who broke through the shell of loneliness I had carried from Boston. Once, when I told her briefly about my family and about Sophia, she placed a hand firmly on my shoulder and said, "You are not anyone's shadow. They may not see it, but I do. And one day, the whole world will too." Those words, seemingly simple, touched the deepest place in my heart, the place that had been wounded until it felt numb. While I was struggling to build a new life, Sophia continued to shine on social media as if life itself were a flawless stage designed just for her. On Facebook, she posted photos of her travels across Europe, standing before the Eiffel Tower with a glass of wine in her hand, lounging on a yacht in Santorini with a silk dress fluttering in the wind, or showing off a brand new Chanel bag, a gift from mom and dad. Each time I happened to see those pictures, a familiar bitterness welled up inside me. While I counted every penny to pay my rent, Sophia lived in luxury with unconditional support from our parents. And what hurt the most was that they never asked how I was doing, only calling occasionally to boast. Sophia just got another promotion, or she really is our pride. In those moments, I often sat alone in my tiny room, the laptop resting on my lap, the glow of the screen casting light on my tired face. I looked back at my journey. Maybe I wasn't wealthy or successful like Sophia, but I was independent, earning my own living without relying on anyone. I began to develop the habit of saving, setting aside a small amount each month into a separate account, treating it like a seed for the future. I made long-term plans. After a few years, I would pursue a master's degree in communications, or perhaps start a small agency of my own. The scribbled notes filling the pages of my old notebook stood as proof of that determination. On sleepless nights, I would step out onto my narrow balcony, gazing at Manhattan's lights flickering through the mist. This city was harsh, but it was also full of opportunities. I told myself, if I can be persistent enough, one day I will no longer have to bow my head to my parents or to Sophia's shadow. That thought, small as it was, became the flame that kept me moving forward. Every penny saved, every successful campaign at work, every time I stood tall after a failure, all of it gradually built a different version of Judith. Stronger, more independent, and no longer easily crushed by poisonous comparisons. I knew clearly that the road I had chosen was not easy, but the very fact that it was my own choice was enough to make me proud. The house in Boston where I was born and raised was always touted by my parents as a point of pride. They would tell relatives and friends, "We paid off this house long ago, there is no burden left." I remember many times when guests came over, my father would laugh loudly and slap the polished wooden wall. "This roof belongs to us, no one can take it away." Those words were etched into my memory, as if the house itself symbolized the Carter family's success. But the truth, as I would learn later, was completely different. When I was 24 and beginning to settle into my job in New York, one evening I received an unexpected call from my father. His voice trembled, very unlike his usual confidence. "Judith, can you come back to Boston this weekend? Your mother and I need to talk urgently." I remember walking into that house and feeling the air so heavy it was hard to breathe. My father sat with his head bowed. My mother's hands were clasped tightly, her eyes red. After a long, roundabout lead-up, they finally confessed. My father had failed at a small business venture, a building supplies store he had trusted completely. To salvage it, he had secretly mortgaged the house to borrow a large sum from the bank. But the business collapsed, and now that loan had become a crushing burden on the whole family. I was stunned when I heard those words. The house they always claimed had been paid off long ago was actually in the bank's hands. I asked in desperation, "Does Sophia know?" My mother immediately shook her head, almost pleading, "No, she cannot know. She would panic. She needs to focus on her career. Could you help your father and me this one time? We will pay it back gradually, we just need to keep the house from being repossessed." I sat in silence for a long time, torn between anger and pain. My whole childhood I had been treated as a burden, forced to learn how to save every penny, made to give up my dreams just to avoid wasting money. And yet now, when they were trapped in crisis, the one they turned to was me, the child they had never acknowledged. But in my mother's panicked eyes and in my father's broken sighs, I saw a trace of responsibility. I did not want the house of my childhood, even if it was filled with bitter memories, to be seized, turning the family into a public humiliation. So I agreed. I signed my name as co-owner on the loan, committing to the bank that I would share the burden of monthly payments. I remember clearly what I said then. "I will help, but on one condition. Sophia must never know." My parents nodded over and over, as if they had just grabbed the last lifeline. They promised to repay me every cent, promised this would never affect my future. But deep down, I knew those promises were nothing more than words of comfort. From that day on, my life took a new turn. Each month, after receiving my paycheck, I carved out a large portion to send back to Boston. Some months, I had to cut my expenses to the bone: fewer meals out, no new clothes, even moving in with a friend to lower rent costs. I lived frugally, but I always made sure the payment receipt reached the bank on time. No one but my parents and I knew the truth. Sophia continued to live lavishly, carefree, posting photos of new handbags and high heels with captions like, "Thank you to my loving parents." The resentment inside me grew thicker with each passing day. Every time I saw one of Sophia's posts on Facebook, I wanted to scream, "I am the one keeping that house from collapsing, not her." But I stayed silent. I knew if I spoke up, my parents would call me jealous and say I didn't think of the family. I chose to bear the burden quietly, like someone standing in the shadows. Time went on and the debt remained, but I gradually learned to live with it. Each monthly payment felt like an obligation, a scar reminding me that this family only needed me in times of crisis. I remember once, having dinner with Veronica at a small restaurant near the office. I let out a sigh when the bill arrived. She frowned and asked, "You work so hard and you're always worried about money. Is something wrong?" I forced a smile and said nothing, because how could I explain to a friend that my parents, the very people who had always looked down on me, were making me pay off the loan on the house they bragged about to the world? Some nights, lying on the small bed in Queens, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder, why do I have to carry this burden? Is it because I am the less loved child that I must suffer more? Yet in those moments of exhaustion, I would persuade myself otherwise. At least I was doing the right thing. At least I could keep the childhood memories, even if distorted, from sinking into a total loss. Still, that silence never bought me recognition from my family. My parents continued to compare me to Sophia, repeating that I should follow your sister's example. They never once said thank you, never once acknowledged that it was I who was keeping the house from being taken. That truth, over the years, became a quiet wound, both aching and cold. If anything kept me going, it was the belief that the truth would one day come to light. I did not need to shout or argue. I only needed one chance, one moment, and everything would reveal itself. That moment finally arrived at that winter family party, when I set my glass down and said, "Then let her cover the rent." That dinner room that night remains vivid in my memory, like a film playing in slow motion. The moment those words left my lips, the lively atmosphere of the crowded party was instantly extinguished. The clinking of forks and knives against plates ceased, half-finished conversations dissolved into silence, leaving only the sound of the cold wind whistling outside the window and the pendulum clock ticking steadily in the living room. Every gaze turned toward me, some relatives with mouths agape, familiar neighbors glancing at each other and whispering. I sat upright, my eyes calm, while my parents stood frozen, as if they had forgotten how to breathe. Sophia, of course, was the first to shatter the silence. She tilted her head back with a mocking laugh, her voice dripping with scorn. "What kind of joke is this, Judith? This house has belonged to us for years. Mom and Dad paid it off ages ago. Stop making a fool of yourself in front of everyone." Her words echoed through the room like a knife cutting deeper into the contempt I had endured for so many years. I looked straight at her, not answering right away, but slowly pulling a thick folder from my handbag. When I placed it on the table, the soft but resounding thud caught everyone's attention. I opened the stack of papers, sliding out each monthly receipt, stamped with the bank's electronic signature. "These are the payments I have made, month after month, for the past 4 years. I said clearly, each word falling onto the cold table like a weight. Guests leaned in, some straining to see. I watched my father's face drain of color, his lips moving without sound. My mother bowed her head, avoiding my eyes, her trembling hands clutching the napkin tightly. Sophia still refused to back down. She raised her eyebrows, giving a cold smile. "You're quite the storyteller, Judith. Mom and Dad would never ask you to do something like this. They don't need to. You're just trying to smear this family's name." Her words were like fuel poured onto the fire, but this time, I did not let anger carry me away. I kept my voice steady and firm. "The bank doesn't fabricate things, Sophia. Every number, every transaction is recorded, and if necessary, anyone here can verify it. My reply cast the room into a suffocating silence. A few guests glanced at each other, whispering brief remarks. My uncle, seated nearby, cleared his throat as if to break the oppressive air. But no one dared to speak aloud. I looked over at my father. He avoided my eyes, his face flushed with shame, his hand gripping the wine glass so tightly that his knuckles turned white. My mother bit her lip, her gaze unfocused, as though silently begging me to stop. I still remember Sophia's expression in that moment. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "Are you so jealous of me that you'd invent this whole story?" She hurled the question like a slap, hoping it would make me retreat. But this time, I was no longer the 16-year-old girl who swallowed her tears after her sister's birthday party. I was grown, and in my hands I held the truth. I pushed another stack of receipts toward the middle of the table. "This is the proof. If anyone still doubts, I'm willing to show the entire bank account. Your parents came to New York to beg me to save this house, and I agreed. I have been paying, quietly, for 4 years. Meanwhile, you keep boasting that the house was paid off long ago. You can keep fooling Sophia, but you cannot fool the bank, and you certainly cannot fool me." A murmur of whispers spread across the dinner table. I saw relatives and neighbors' faces mix surprise with disbelief. Some shook their heads, others looked at my parents with a different expression altogether, the look of disappointment and contempt. My father stood up trembling, as if to explain, but could not find any fitting words. My mother let out a small plea. "Judith, don't make a scene, we are a family." I looked at her with cold eyes. A family? A family that only turns to me in crisis, but treats me like an embarrassment when things are fine? That family I have long been used to enduring. The room, after my final words, felt as though a bomb had just gone off. All the familiar sounds of a family gathering, the laughter, the clinking of silverware against plates, the pouring of wine into glasses, vanished. In their place came hushed whispers, scrutinizing glances, sideways looks laced with suspicion and pity. I caught a guest at the far end of the table quietly muttering to the person beside him. So it wasn't as they always bragged. A few relatives shook their heads, gathered their bags, and left, clearly unwilling to witness any more of this humiliation. The air grew so stifling that someone dabbed sweat from their forehead with a napkin, despite the freezing winter winds howling outside. My father, who once stood proudly before relatives with a confident voice, now trembled like a child caught in a lie. He stammered, his lips moving but unable to form any defense convincing enough. It was only temporary. In the end, it was my mother who spoke, her voice trembling yet stubborn. "We intended to pay you back. You must understand, we had no other choice. We only did it to keep a roof over the family's head." The excuse sounded feeble, as if even she did not believe the words coming out of her own mouth. Sophia, who until then had sat frozen in place, suddenly shot to her feet, her face flushed with fury. "What do you want, Judith?" Her shrill voice rang through the room. "Do you want to humiliate me in front of the whole family, in front of our friends? Are you so jealous of me that you staged this little drama? Everything you're saying, it's just to make me a laughingstock." She looked around the table as if expecting support, but no one spoke. Every eye lingered only on the stack of papers I had laid down earlier. The truth was too obvious for anyone to defend. I turned to my parents, my gaze colder than ever. "All my life, you forced me to follow her example, to do everything so the family wouldn't be ashamed. But in the end, who has been keeping this house from foreclosure? Who has been paying the bank month after month? Not Sophia. Me, it's me." I emphasized every word so no one in that room could pretend they hadn't heard. My father lowered his head, the glass in his hand trembling violently. My mother tried to speak but choked, releasing only a small, stifled sob. Sophia stood there gasping for breath, but her confidence had clearly abandoned her. The entire dinner sank into a deathly silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick sounding like a hammer striking down on everyone's head. I took a deep breath, feeling my heartbeat pound in my chest. Then I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor in the hush of the room. Every pair of eyes followed my every movement. I gathered the folder, slipped it into my handbag, and shrugged my coat over my shoulders. No one stopped me, no one spoke. I turned my back and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the chaos I knew would ensure that from this moment on, the Carter family would never be the same. When my hand touched the front doorknob, I heard my mother whispering, nearly in tears, "Judith, don't leave. We are still a family." But I did not turn back. I knew that in their eyes the family only existed when I bore the debt. When I needed love and recognition, I was nothing but an extra shadow beside Sophia. I opened the door and the winter wind rushed in, cold and sharp yet cleansing. My steps on the porch sounded steady and resolute. Behind me the whispers rose again, mingling with the scrape of chairs and the hurried footsteps of people leaving. The image of my parents and sister sitting motionless at the chaotic table was etched into my mind. Three people who once thought they could hide forever, now forced to face a truth laid bare. I walked on, feeling a surge of pain and relief at once. The door closed behind me along with all the years of being belittled, the pointless comparisons, the times I had to swallow my tears. I knew that tonight no one in that family would sleep peacefully. For me, it was more than leaving a party, it was the beginning of a completely different life, a life in which I would no longer be bound by my sister's shadow or my parents' lies. The Boston winter was bitter, but walking down the long, snow-covered street I felt a new flame inside me. The flame of truth spoken aloud, the flame of release after years of silent endurance. And I knew that from this moment the Carter family had fractured, not because of me, but because of the lies they had cultivated for so long. After that night my phone hardly stopped buzzing. Calls from my father and mother came in a rush, as if they could pierce the screen. I saw their names appear and my chest tightened, yet I let the ringing die out. Occasionally I would listen to their voicemails, my father's voice low and trembling. "Judith, don't make this a big deal. Don't tell anyone. If the neighbors, the friends find out everything, then we will have no face left. You are family, you understand, right?" I laughed bitterly. When they needed me to carry the debt, they never cared about my feelings. But when they feared losing face, they begged in a panic, as if their honor mattered more than the truth I had quietly carried. My mother left a string of long, hurried messages. "I know you're angry, but it's all for the family. You can't destroy everything. We only need you to stay silent, and this will pass. Sophia must not know, and the neighbors shouldn't find out either. Think of your parents' reputation, think of the family name." I read them over and over, each word like a knife reminding me that, in their eyes, I had never been an independent person but merely a tool to patch over their lies. Sophia chose a different path. The very next morning I saw a new post on her Facebook, a photo of her beaming in an elegant red dress with the caption, "Nothing's funnier than when family members get jealous and invent stories to bring you down. The sun can't be blocked by a tiny shadow." Number family drama. Number pitiful. I did not need anyone to point out who those words were aimed at. Dozens of comments from her friends poured in. "Don't mind the jealous one. She's the star, they only want to bask in her light." I scrolled past, my eyes stinging, then turned my phone off. I was no longer angry, I only felt hollow. In that moment I realized the family had never truly regarded me as one of them. They never protected me, never stood by me. To them, I existed only when someone was needed to shoulder a burden. That night, in the hotel room, the stack of papers I had kept all those years lay before me. Receipts, loan agreements, my trembling signatures. Everything compressed into a single truth. I had bound myself to the Boston house like an invisible chain, and if I truly wanted freedom, I would have to break it. The next day, I met with a lawyer, a middle-aged man who had previously done legal work for my company. He listened as I explained everything, then nodded. "You have every right to withdraw, Judith. Your ownership share isn't large, but you have paid more than that. If you hand it back to the bank, they will deal with your parents directly. From that point on, you will have no legal responsibility." He paused, peering at me over his thick glasses. "But you must be certain. This is a final decision, you cannot turn back." I was silent for a few seconds, thinking of nights waiting at the bus stop in the rain, of Sophia's birthday party with the new car, of my parents telling me to give up Colombia because it wasn't worth the investment. I thought of the contempt in their eyes when they compared me to her, and of the pleading messages asking me to think of the family's honor instead of myself. The answer inside me was clearer than ever. I looked up. "I'm certain, from now on, they must pay for it themselves. I am no longer involved." The signing process took place that afternoon. I laid my pen across each page, feeling as if I were removing a shackle. When it was done, the lawyer looked at me and said softly, "You have just returned the burden. Sometimes that is the only way to survive." I nodded, feeling a rush in my chest that was equal parts relief and bitterness. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. No more debt forcing me to sacrifice, no more house dragging me back, no more hollow pleas binding me to an endless cycle. I knew my decision would send my parents and Sophia into panic, would throw them into real chaos. But for me, that no longer mattered. I had faced the truth, and at last, I had chosen myself. When I firmly removed my name from the loan, the real earthquake began for the Carter family. Just 2 weeks later, the bank sent an official warning to the Boston address. If the payments were not kept up regularly, the house would be marked for foreclosure. That night, I received another call from my father. I answered this time, only to be direct. His voice was urgent. "Judith, what have you done? The bank just contacted me. You pulled your name out? Do you realize what this means? They will—" I cut him off, my tone calm but resolute. "I know exactly what it means, and it is precisely because I know that I did it. I carried this burden for 4 years while you never valued me. From now on, you pay it yourselves. I'm no longer involved." Before he could react, I hung up. My parents, who had relied solely on the money I quietly sent for 4 years, suddenly found themselves empty-handed. My father's income from his small shop was nowhere near enough to cover the costs, and my mother had long since stopped working, spending her days lingering over tea with friends. They were stunned, scrambling to borrow, but no one dared lend them such a large sum once the rumors had already begun to spread through the community. Boston was a city where private stories spread faster than the winter wind. Neighbors who once admired my family, the successful Carter family with 2 outstanding daughters, now whispered across fences, "I heard the house was mortgaged long ago." Not paid off like they bragged. Friends who used to share the dinner table and raise glasses in praise quietly withdrew, unwilling to be associated with a disgraced family. The honor my father had always boasted about collapsed in an instant, leaving him with downcast eyes every time he stepped outside. My mother, once accustomed to maintaining an air of elegance, became the center of gossip at social gatherings. People spoke behind her back. Mrs. Carter was always showing off about her daughter at Stanford, about their house, and now it's all out in the open. She had lived on the admiration of others, but now she received only looks half pitying, half mocking. I was told that one time, while she sat in her usual cafe, a group of women walked in. For a few seconds they went quiet, then changed tables to avoid sitting near her. Never before had society turned its back on her so clearly. Sophia bore the harshest blow. After the dinner party, the truth spread even to the fashion company where she worked. At first, she tried to keep up her rising star image, continuing to post photos flaunting a lavish lifestyle. But her coworkers began to look at her differently. A senior manager whispered that the brand could not be tied to someone seen as living off her family while letting her younger sister carry the debt. Not long after, Sophia was demoted from her project manager position to an unnoticed desk job. From being a regular presence at fashion events, she gradually faded from publicity photos altogether. That shock drove Sophia into an outburst on social media. She posted long statuses, blaming her downfall on sick jealousy that had ruined her reputation. But instead of sympathy, she faced a flood of criticism. If you were really talented, why live off your parents? You didn't even know your sister was paying your debts, and you still act superior. Comments poured in, shares multiplied, and Sophia went from proud figure to public mockery. Meanwhile, the Boston house became the center of gossip. People passing by pointed and whispered, "That's the Carter house, about to be taken by the bank." One day, a local newspaper even printed a small notice in the real estate section listing homes under foreclosure, warning my parents' address was there. For a community that once praised them, it was nothing less than a slap in the face. The Carter family, once held up as an example of success, was now cited as a warning to others. Don't end up like them, always bragging until everything collapses. I wasn't there, I didn't witness it directly, but the stories I heard were enough to picture the scene. Once, Veronica sent me a message with a screenshot. Sophia had been blocked by a colleague on LinkedIn after she tried to send a connection request. Under the image, Veronica had written, "See, the world is small. The truth never stays hidden." I looked at the picture, not smiling, not gloating, only feeling a chill. I didn't need to do anything, didn't need to push them down. Their own deceit had carried them to this point. My parents desperately tried to contact me. They sent emails, handwritten letters, and left long messages. "Have you abandoned the family? Can't you see how much we are suffering? Don't you love us?" But this time I did not respond. I knew full well that those words contained no unconditional love, only panic at losing their support. They were not crying because they had lost me, but because they had lost the house, their reputation, the glossy facade they had built. Boston's winter that year was so cold the ponds froze, but the chill in their hearts must have been far worse. They had once stood before the community with confidence and looked at me with contempt. Now neighbors turned their backs on them, friends withdrew, colleagues and even businesses rejected them. This was not revenge that I had orchestrated, it was the inevitable consequence of the truth being revealed. I did not need to say another word. No defense, no argument, everything unraveled on its own, like a line of falling dominoes. And in that collapse, for the first time, I felt that I was no longer bound to the Carter family. I stepped back and let the truth do its work. The truth, like a flame, burned away all the falseness they had built. I left Boston without saying goodbye to my family. The city that held so many childhood memories had become a land of ruins. On the train back to New York, I watched the streets slide by through the winter mist, the townscape blurring in the gray. My heart no longer felt heavy as before. Instead, there was a strange calm. The tie that had bound me to the Carter family had finally snapped, and in that moment I realized I was truly free. Back in New York, I threw myself into work. At the marketing firm, I volunteered for more projects, not because I needed the money anymore, the weight of the bank loan had lifted from my shoulders, but because I wanted to prove my own ability. Every day I arrived earlier, stayed later, pouring myself into brainstorming ideas and finding creative solutions for clients. Gradually, I became the name people trusted when a project hit trouble. One day, my direct manager looked at me, smiled, and said, "Judith, I don't know where you get your strength, but you don't just work hard. You work with your heart." The words were simple, yet to me, more precious than all the hollow praise my parents had ever showered on Sophia. Then an idea struck. During a conference at Columbia, the very school I had once been forced to give up, I met a group of young students, among them a girl of Latin heritage. She told me she was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford tuition, that her family treated her like a burden and offered no support. Listening to her story, I saw myself 10 years earlier. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking. If back then someone had reached out a hand to me, perhaps the road would have been less rough. And I decided that I would be that person for others. I began by setting up a small scholarship fund. At first, it was just a portion of the savings I had carefully put aside over the years. I named it Second Chance. The fund was meant for students abandoned by their families or those who received no support from relatives but still hungered for knowledge. I reached out to several universities, worked with advisors to identify students who truly needed help. On the first day, when I signed the scholarship checks for 3 students, my hands trembled. Not because I regretted the money, but because in that moment I felt the pain I had once endured transforming into something good. Balancing my company work and running the fund made my schedule busier than ever, but I had never felt so energized. Each time I received a thank you email from a student, "You gave me hope, I won't drop out now," it was as if my heart was being stitched back together. I realized the recognition I needed did not come from my parents, nor from a society that judged me through Sophia's shadow. It came from the very people whose lives were touched by what I chose to do. Veronica, my friend who had always stood by me, once pulled me into a cafe, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You know what, Judith? You've turned your pain into strength. Not many people can do that. Your family may never have seen you as part of them, but this world needs you. And you made the right choice." I smiled, and for the first time I truly felt peace inside. From then on, the days no longer felt heavy. I no longer stayed up at night rereading Sophia's mocking messages, no longer replayed in my mind my parents' cutting remarks. Instead, I spent evenings working on scholarship plans, on creative projects I loved, on gatherings with friends that made me feel like myself. Little by little, I realized there was no hatred left in me. Only a calm remained, like the still surface of a lake after a storm. One evening, while walking along the East River, the wind tossing my hair, I suddenly thought, if my parents had accepted me back then, would I have become this person? Perhaps not. Without the injustices, I would never have learned how to stand tall. Without the wounds, I would never have understood the value of healing. And without the years of being dismissed, I might never have discovered the quiet joy of helping someone else finally be seen. I looked up at the city lights, knowing in my heart that I had entered a new chapter. A chapter where I no longer needed my parents' approval, no longer had to prove myself against Sophia. I had rewritten the story of my life. And in that story, I was not a shadow, not the second child, but Judith Carter, a woman who knew her worth and used it to bring light to others. Healing did not arrive in a single day. It came piece by piece, through every successful project, through every student's face lit with hope, through every morning I woke without the weight pressing on my chest. And I understood that at last, I had broken free from the chains of a toxic family. I had found freedom, peace, and a greater purpose for my life. One winter evening, work brought me back to Boston for a conference. After many years, I once again drove through the familiar streets where my childhood had passed in silence and comparison. Cold wind lashed against the windshield, snowflakes drifted under the yellow glow of the streetlights. As my car rolled down the street where my old family home still stood, my heart tightened. There it was, the house itself, but stripped of its former pride. On the front lawn, a large sign was staked into the ground. For sale. I pulled over to the curb and rolled down the window. The windows of the house were dark, no warm glow like during the holidays. The brick walls had faded, the once polished wooden door now dull and worn. It all looked like an empty shell, stripped of the life my parents had once boasted about to the neighbors. I sat still in the car as memories came rushing back. My 16th birthday, standing by the window while Sophia was handed the keys to her brand new car. The Thanksgivings when I scrubbed piles of dishes in the sink while my parents praised her accomplishments. The afternoon they came to New York, begging me to save this house from foreclosure. Each memory replayed like an old, blurry film behind those darkened windows. And yet, strangely, my heart did not ache the way it once had. I did not cry, nor did I feel hatred. Only a gentle emptiness, like when a wound has healed, leaving behind a scar, but no pain. I exhaled, watching my breath curl into the cold air, and without meaning to, I smiled. The house that had once chained me, the place that held favoritism and contempt, was now nothing more than a piece of property waiting for a new owner. It no longer had any power over me. I stepped out of the car and stood across the street to look one last time. In my mind, rang the words I wanted to tell myself. Victory is not making them fall, but no longer letting them define your worth. In truth, the downfall of my parents and Sophia no longer mattered. They might be disgraced, shunned by society, but that was not what I was seeking. True victory was this moment standing before the childhood home and realizing it no longer had the power to decide who I am. I pressed my hand to the cold car window, a whispered farewell to the little girl Judith who once sat crying alone in the small upstairs room, longing for an embrace, for a word of recognition. I wanted to tell that girl, "We have come so far. We have found our family in our work, in our friends, and in the very students given a second chance. We are no longer trapped here." The wind howled stronger, sending a few dry leaves spinning across the porch. I turned and walked toward the car. Each step felt like cutting another remaining thread that tied me to the past. When the car door closed, I looked at the house one last time in the rearview mirror. It grew smaller, blurred into the night, then vanished. But inside me there was no pain, only calm and freedom. On the highway back to New York, I turned on soft music, letting the piano carry me through each mile. The city appeared in the distance, its lights shining like open arms. I knew I was beginning a new chapter, a chapter written only by me. No longer defined by my parents, no longer compared to Sophia, no longer the second child. I was Judith Carter, and from this night on, I would live by my own worth. Looking back on it all, I realized this journey was never about proving I was right and they were wrong. The truth had revealed itself without me needing to shout, without fiery arguments. Just a few sheets of bank statements, cold and undeniable, had been enough to expose everything. That is the first lesson I want to leave for anyone trapped in the injustices of a toxic family. Truth does not need to scream to exist. It only needs your patience to preserve it, and one day, it will find the light on its own. I also came to understand that family, even if bound by blood, is not always what defines your worth. For years, I let my parents' criticisms, favoritism, and comparisons cage me in feelings of inadequacy. But when I walked away, when I built my life with my own hands, I learned that true value does not come from how others see you, but from the choices you make to keep moving forward. Family may abandon you, may belittle you, but they do not have the right to decide who you are. And in the end, I realized that healing does not come from watching them fall. It comes from the decisive choice to cut the ties and choose yourself. When I let go of the house, when I let go of the burden of proving myself to them, only then did I truly step into a new chapter. Freedom is not watching others pay the price, it is refusing to let them control your soul. Perhaps many who hear this story will see reflections of themselves in it. Maybe you were compared to your siblings, maybe you were called the problem child, maybe you sacrificed your dreams for someone else. And maybe you have carried that wound for years, unseen by anyone. But remember this. You are not anyone's shadow. You are not the cheap definition your family pinned on you. Your value lies in the choices you make for yourself to stand up, to keep moving forward, to love yourself. If you are living in that reality now, believe me, you are not alone. I was once where you are, and I found freedom by letting go. One day, you too will smile as I did, when you look back at what once hurt you and realize, true victory was never about making someone fall, it was about no longer letting them define your worth. And that is the final story I want to leave behind, a reminder to anyone listening. Never lose yourself in someone else's shadow, no matter who they are. You deserve a life of freedom, peace, and wholeness, a life written by your own hand.